All right, welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into something really personal, a reflection on a marriage in crisis. We're going to explore how wounds from our childhood can show up and, well, create these really destructive patterns in our adult relationships. But more importantly, we'll see how just becoming aware of them can be the very first step toward healing.
So, this is where it all starts, with this incredibly raw and powerful confession. It's like a key that unlocks this whole cycle of pain and misunderstanding that just tore a family apart. And we're about to see how this one single sentence tells us so much about the hidden story of a relationship on the brink.
You know, this confession is really the launchpad for the author's entire journey of self-discovery. He's looking back, trying to piece it all together, trying to figure out how his own actions played a part in the breakdown of his marriage.
So, the author is super honest here. He admits that for a long time, he had this really destructive pattern. Whenever his wife would express that she was unhappy, he would just retreat. He'd turn to alcohol and sex. But here's the thing. It wasn't about connecting with her. It was all about escaping the pain of their crumbling relationship.
And of course, these weren't solutions. They were just the only coping mechanisms he knew. But instead of building a bridge between them, his actions were digging this huge chasm of resentment. From his wife's perspective, she didn't see a man in pain. She saw a man who was just neglecting her and their family.
The truly tragic irony here is that his attempts to escape the pain only led to more and more conflict. This serious family contradiction, as he calls it, ultimately blew up their marriage. The very escape hatch he thought he was using was actually a trap.
So after the divorce, the author suddenly has a lot of time on his hands, a lot of time to reflect on what went so wrong. And that's when he starts to dig deeper, asking himself this one really critical question about what was really going on.
He started to wonder, was the drinking and the fighting, was that the real problem? Or was it something else, something deeper, kind of lurking beneath the surface of all their arguments? And this one question would lead him to a pretty profound realization about his own past.
And this is the tragic paradox of the whole situation, right? The author's attempts to cope with his pain only made everything worse. His drinking and his womanizing, they weren't acts of malice. They were these desperate attempts to fill a void inside him. They might have numbed his pain for a little while, but they just amplified his wife's, leaving both of them feeling completely empty and confused.
So, where did all this pain actually come from? Well, the author traces it way back, all the way to his childhood, to a time long before he even met his wife. And this is where the story gets really fascinating.
It turns out the author grew up in a home where his mother suffered from a serious mental illness. And look, this isn't about blaming her at all. It's about understanding how that kind of environment shaped his emotional development. The tools he learned for dealing with life as a kid, they had a huge impact on his relationships as an adult.
I mean, just imagine growing up in a home where you never really know what to expect. One day, your mom is loving and there for you, and the next, she's withdrawn and distant. As a child, you might feel like you have to be the adult, taking care of her instead of the other way around. In that kind of environment, it's almost impossible to learn healthy ways to deal with stress or conflict or just feeling lonely.
The author puts it this way. He just never learned how to solve his own problems or how to bounce back from things. This isn't some character flaw, right? It's a direct result of what he went through as a kid. He's basically carrying around a wound that never got a chance to heal.
So how did this childhood wound actually show up in his marriage? Well, it created this destructive feedback loop, a pattern that psychologists actually have a name for, the anxious attachment cycle.
It's a total catch-22. You're so afraid of being abandoned that you start acting in ways that, ironically, make it more likely to happen. The harder you try to hold on, the more your partner pulls away. It's this vicious cycle that's just so hard to break.
And this table here gives us a really clear picture of that cycle in action. It all starts with a trigger, right? Like some marital tension. The author's response is to drink, to numb that discomfort. But that just makes his wife feel even more distant, which then becomes the next trigger. The cycle just keeps repeating, and with every single turn, the crisis gets deeper.
This story might be starting to sound familiar to you, and that's because it's a timeless human drama. It's something we see played out in literature all the time. In fact, there's a character in a pretty famous novel who is a perfect example of this same destructive pattern.
In Tolstoy's Anna Karenina, the character of Blonsky is a fascinating parallel to our author. He's not really a bad person, but he's just emotionally immature. He can't handle conflict, so he escapes into a world of affairs and self-indulgence. And his wife, Dolly, she's just left to suffer in silence, just like the author's wife was. It's the same story, really, just a different time and place.
So what's the big takeaway from all this?
Is the author just doomed to repeat this pattern for the rest of his life? Well, the answer is no. In fact, the very act of identifying the pattern, that's the first step toward breaking it for good.
The author's willingness to actually look at his own past, to connect the dots between his childhood and his marriage, that is the absolute key to his recovery. It's not easy, facing your own demons, but it's the only way to finally break free from them. Understanding is the first and most powerful step toward a different future.
And this kind of self-awareness, wow, it's a rare and precious gift. It's the ability to see yourself clearly, to really get your own motivations and patterns. And it's not about blaming yourself or feeling guilty. It's about taking responsibility for your own life and making a conscious choice to change.
The author's story is just such a powerful reminder that our past doesn't have to define our future. We all have wounds, we all have these patterns that we learned as kids, but we also have the power to change. By understanding our own stories, we can take back control of our lives and start to write a brand new ending.